welcome to my talk concerning making the jump to JUnit 5 from JUnit 4 using the Spring Framework. My name is Meek, and we'll go ahead and get started. So, a little bit of background on myself. I've been an active Java developer since 2010. The oldest version of Java I've ever worked on was Java 1.6. I was doing this in the process of working on network provisioning software, which was a lot of fun. Currently training for my first half marathon. Originally, this was set for March of this year. That's been postponed, so I'm just going to continue training. I have two cats, Deacon and Raina, and as you see here in the photos, on the left-hand side is Deacon, on the right-hand side is Raina. So the other part is I'm married to the most talented Agile coach Baker known to me. So she currently does consulting with executives, but there's a lot of shop talk that happens, and she's usually coaching me on how to be a better developer and whatnot. And here in the little corner here, you see this wonderful little treat she's made. It's a peanut butter Reese's cup. So that's just a little bit of background on me, but let's go ahead and jump into what you came for, which was understanding that migration path for JUnit 4 to JUnit 5. So before we talk about that, from my perspective, I believe that there's a deeper problem that we're not talking about. Test frameworks are usually the last thing to be upgraded in the code base. And I think it comes from the idea of we want things to continue to work. And kind of a side note, JUnit was originally released in 2006. And I think as the comic illustrates here, right, this is our attitude. Right? We never touch the ancient code. But the problem is when it comes to our testing frameworks, especially for those of us who are practitioners of TDD, this should be the first thing we should be looking at, and we should be considering how to upgrade these things, because these are the tools that are giving us the confidence that our software is working as designed and intended. Another aspect is something we're not talking about either. So I pulled this from last year's presentation track for a developer conference. Notice that there are a lot of things talking about migrating beyond Java 8, the SE 11 developer certifications, and discovering modern Java. A lot of things indicating towards that path, but nothing around those frameworks. Now, granted, this is the core Java, but when I looked across the whole programming track, there weren't anything. And to put it in context, this was actually the conference I just recently presented at DevNexus last year. And when I was talking at that conference, that was something I pointed out. Again, I think as a community, we have to start being willing to talk about not only the cool frameworks we're using to develop our code and the cool features of a programming language, but also those testing frameworks that we're looking at as well. So, first question, it's just a dependency swap out, right? No. JUnit 5 represents a major version shift and reorganization effort by the JUnit team. It actually breaks it down into three main projects now. So you have the JUnit platform, so that includes the test engine API interfaces, as well as the JUnit Jupyter, which contains the actual implementation. So again, doing best software practice of decoupling the interfaces from the implementation so changes can be made in the future while not breaking compatibility. And then JUnit Vintage, which supports running JUnit 3 and 4 tests in JUnit 5. So if you're listening to my last comment, there's that other question. Can't I use JUnit Vintage? You could, and I would say why? Because it's kind of kicking the problem down the road. I understand that there are needs for older code bases where we can't exactly go in and dive in and make those changes, but I would press that we may need to reevaluate that. And also, personal experience has been that JUnit Vintage hasn't worked for me. Usually the testing fails, it does something weird. So I would say that JUnit 5 can be introduced to an existing code base. And also, if you're going to do it into an existing code base, right, you're gonna have to be mindful of the fact that you're gonna make some changes there. With that in mind, you'll see some clarity and some changes that happened in the annotations. So again, this is kind of why it's not an easy one-to-one swap out, right? There were some updates that were made, and to me, it makes it more clear. You can see that the @test annotation stays the same, but you can see for some of these other ones, they've become more specific, right? So before all versus before class, right? And then the before becomes a before each, and after each, right? My favorite one is probably the @ignore becomes a disabled. For me, that's a little bit clearer in my head. So you can see where at JUnit 5, they were trying to aim for conciseness behind what they were saying and what they were doing. Another thing you'll see is the packaging name. No longer is test located at that level. Again, it goes back and reflects the changes we saw earlier when I said that there was a separation between the implementation and the interfaces. So you see this org.junit.jupyter.api.test, and then the same with the assertions. Again, going back for that conciseness and that clarity of where things reside. So now that we've kind of talked about the bigger pieces, let's kind of talk through what does an upgrade path look like. So in this example, we're going to talk through with Spring Framework. With some of the other frameworks that are out there, they have started going to having JUnit 5 be the default on new projects. So we won't go into detail of that, but we'll talk at least here. So at least with Spring Framework, right, you want to make sure you have Java 8 or higher. Again, this is used some of the Lambda functionality behind it in order to do this. And then Spring Framework 5 or higher. So looking through the Spring Framework setup, Spring Boot 2.0.8.release is actually the first time you see Spring Boot 5. And so you want to use that version or higher. It actually became the default in Spring Boot 2.4. So in this example, I'm actually going to show it using the Spring 2.4 because that's easier. And I want to show off some of the features that are new to JUnit 5 in that process. You want to make sure you upgrade your dependencies in your POM XML, and then you want to swap out the following bits, right? A run with becomes an extend with, your Spring Runner becomes a Spring Extensions class, and your before becomes a before each. And also if you're using Mockito, your JUnit Runner class becomes a Mockito extension. And a keynote with the runners and extensions, kind of the cool thing is now you're able to do many extensions, where in the past you had to choose between a singular runner. Right? I actually ended up using this on a project recently where they had I needed to add in the Mockito extension. So I was able to do an extend with Mockito extension.class, and it worked perfectly, no problems, no issues. So something to keep note. And then also that last part of, you can flip to the earlier slide where it says the TLDR diff part 2, where we talked about that packets guidance. And again, when we demo it, we'll actually walk through that. So not only is the same functionality there, but there are a couple of cool features that I find extremely helpful. The @display_name allows you to add a human readable name to the test. I find this great for developers who may not be as experienced in the code base to be able to identify what exactly has gone wrong in a test. In the past, when my team has done those things, we've had to come up with some sort of weird naming convention of should do this, when this, then kind of pattern in the method name. So this allows us to just be able to add something that's a little bit more readable, and also could potentially allow for inexperienced developers, any of your Scrum Masters, to kind of take a look and understand where has it failed, especially if they happen to be reviewing test case results from a given setup. The other two that go hand in hand is parameterized tests and the CSV file source. The parameterized test allows you to write programmatic tests where multiple inputs can be passed and tested individually. The CSV file source allows you to point to a particular place and say, okay, I want you to use this file to generate and pull in the information behind that. So at this point, we're going to do some live coding. I put that in air quotes because of the fact of I've already done it and I can actually switch branches over into the JUnit 5, but I want to at least try my best to go through it. So without further ado, we're going to pop out and get started. Okay, so to kind of show off, I'm first just going to run the Gradle, I'm actually using Maven, not Gradle. In my work setting, I usually use Gradle. So I figured a lot of people are probably using Maven, so I figured to stick with that. So I'm just going to do a Maven clean test, prove everything works as it is, right? No black magic here, right? Because I feel that's important when we're talking about, hey, I want you to go do this thing, right? All right, cool. So it runs through all the things, tells me everything's good, has 9 successes. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this out for 2.4, and I believe if memory serves me correct, I can do, yep, let's see, do I got a 1? Nope. Okay, so we'll just go with 2.4 for now. Oop. And it helps if I use the right keys. All right, and yeah, sure, we will go ahead and do that part. Now at this point, it's probably going to scream about a lot of different things. So the first place we're going to start is with the controller test, and we'll work through the test first, make sure everything looks correct there, and then we'll work into the service and whatnot, and then I'll, at the end, do the full set with everything converted over to JUnit 5. All right, so let's start with the controller test. As you can see, all the assertions and all the things are screaming a little bit. So what we'll do is, for now, I'm actually going to remove the imports for the time being. All right, and as a side note, with the application itself, this is a simple REST endpoint that allows us to be able to do a couple of things. So just real quick, I'll show you. I've got a simple controller, right, of coffee, one of my favorite things to drink. Unfortunately, because of the time of day, I'm not drinking one right now, but it's one of my favorite things. So I have an endpoint where I can get all the coffees, I can get a coffee by its ID, and then I can get the best rated coffee. Right? So that's what my testing does, and all of this is backed up by an H2 in-memory database, just for simplicity and whatnot. So just as kind of a general view of what the application looks like. All right, so we change this to an extend with. And let's see if, whoops, helps if I don't hit the buttons. Yep, I'll let the system give me a hand here a little bit. All right, I'm going to change that runner into an extension, as I said earlier. All right, and again, the system's going to help me a little bit. I'm also going to go ahead and delete the not needed piece there. Okay, so we'll keep scrolling down. And in this case, again, with the controller test, we're using mock MVC. All right, so let's see. Yep, I want to do that import. All right, cool. All right, let's see. What's it mad about? Okay, let's scroll down here. Ah, the assert. So this needs to be assertions to make this work, right? Because it moved from assert to assertions in JUnit 5. All right, still not happy with that. Let me try and import. Yep, there we go. So I'm actually going to use the JUnit Jupyter API. All right, cool. Now everything looks correct here. Let's scroll back up. All right, cool. Nothing's yelling at me. Everything seems to be okay. All right, so I'm just going to hit Control Save real quick. All right, so that one is good at this point. Now I'm going to move into the service. The service may be a little bit more tricky because I know that there was one thing I had changed here. Yeah, with this before, it may yell at me a little bit either in the runtime or whatnot. We'll wait and see what happens here because at one point in the development of the code, it was demanding that something be static. So just as a heads up, we may run into a little bit of a bump here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and delete the things that it's yelling about for now. Again, I could probably walk through and type and correct them, but we'll do this last one because it's just simply adding that. And, oh yeah, the Jupyter API.assertions. There we go. Now that's correct. All right, extend with. All right, now imported the right thing. It's going to be like, what is this? As I said earlier, it should change to an extension. In this case, I know that with Mockito JUnit Runner, it changed name into Mockito extension. So we do that. Okay. So we see all the mocks and the jacks. Okay, and we'll try before each. All right. Oh, whoops. Helps if I import it. Yep. It's imported. All right. Yeah, let's see that. All right, cool. All right. So the thing here that changes, right, is in JUnit 4 you were able to do an expected. That's no longer the case in 5. This particular ability and annotation does not exist. So what you have to do instead is actually a lambda function. So this is that first place where we see something that happens. So we'll do an assert throws. Right. And with that assert throws, I tell it, okay, here's the expected type. So I'm going to tell it exception.class. Right. I'm going to do a comma. And this is where I insert my lambda. Right. And what I'll do is actually the command I care to call. Or sorry, the method I care to call. So it's actually this one. So I'm just going to use the right keyboard bindings. Paste it in. All right, cool. And also get rid of that. So kind of the cool thing is, right, you now get rid of the wonderful error, your IDE or editor yelling at you and saying, hey, dude, like, this is never used, you don't do anything with it, right? It actually gives you a purpose and allows to avoid that problem. All right, let's see. Static import of the assert throws. Okay, I'll try that again. All right, it's just going to be mad at me for a second. I think I misspelled something. That's usually my biggest problem. There we go. Nice. Now everything looks nice and pretty. So let's go back up here to the top. Make sure we're not missing anything. Okay, so it's going to tell us to get rid of line 11. All right, cool. So now I hit save. So next thing I'm going to do is just going to rerun my tests. All right, cool. Everything, again, works. No problems. All right, So all I've done thus far is just move us over from JUnit 4 to JUnit 5, but I've not done any of the new features around that. So what I'm going to do is actually go into the controller test. I'm going to show off the display name. So we'll take this first one here. Right. So when I do @display name, and it gives me this option, I am able to define that human readable thing. So right now you can see on line 34 of should return all coffees when hitting default resource with get. Right. So right now what I'm going to do is quickly kind of come up with a kind of standard, so to speak, that I would think, okay, so return all coffees. Right. See, I want to do that particular endpoint, and then I expect that to be actually a get and then that endpoint, and then okay, I expect that to be a 200 okay. Right. So you can see here I'm kind of using a quick shorthand to be able to communicate what the expected output and ability of it is, right? And when I run this, so let me do that, and we'll do the Maven clean install. Actually, I wonder. Let me try. I'm going to try doing the run test here in Visual Studio Code, because if I do that, it will probably show it more clearly in its test runner results. All right, looks like it completed. I pull this open. All right, see, so right here in the test report, right, you have return all coffees, the dash, the get 200 and 200. Get for default endpoint dash 200 okay, right? What I told it to be here. So again, just one of those things that helps with readability, helps with some clarity around what it is that you're looking for. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is we're actually going to try out the parameterized test. Now again, with the parameterized test, right, what we would do is we would just give it a list of parameters and give it a CSV, right? So in this case, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm actually going to go ahead and jump over into the JUnit 5 completed setup, and we'll walk through it and I'll explain how all those pieces come together. It will save us a little bit of time here. So let me pop here into the terminal. All right, check out. JUnit 5 complete. Oops. New computer, and I forgot to put that little keyboard shortcut. There we go. All right, cool. Now I'm actually in the right place. So when I scroll up, right, you can see here where I've given all the display names, tries to do a put on this resource, get a 405 method not allowed, right, and to provide that information on the display name. And actually, the test I'm looking for is in the service. I keep saying the wrong thing. All right, let's see. Here we go. So it should return a single coffee, right? Returns a single coffee by the coffee's ID. Right? Now, with this app, right, I have this test data.csv, right, with the CSV file source, right? So this resource starts off looking at the test resources folder, right, in that class path, right? So I pulled up the test data.csv, right? To give the context, right, you'll see here the past index of 0, 1, 2, right? And then the coffee ID, the coffee name, the coffee type, and its rating. Right? So when I look at the coffee test service test, right, you notice here I've got parameterized test. I've told it I want you to take the CSV file located here, and you notice the parameters that I've passed in, right? So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When I look at the test CSV, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? So again, you want those to match up, or it will throw an error message to you saying, hey, you've got a couple of things in the CSV, but not the same thing in the method name. What are you doing? Right? So you can see here where I actually walk through and I parse the ID, right, that I passed in. I tell it, okay, go find by this, right, and then return an optional of the mocked coffees that I created up here at the top, right, that match that ID, right, giving that information and giving that viewpoint, right. So then I say, okay, go get the coffee ID. When I do my asserts, right, okay, here's the pulled single coffee ID, and here's the expected name and rating and the equality on it, right. So now what you're going to see, instead of 9 tests, you should see 11 tests when we run this. Because of the fact of I have 3 items, right? Previously I was testing for just the 1, so I've added 2 more. So 10 on 11. So if I run the whole data set here, okay, no thanks. Thank you VS Code, but I don't really care to do that right now. All right, so we will run all the tests here. Again, prove no magic. Probably helps if I use the Maven W clean test. Great. And you can see here, I had 11 tests run. Well, it's not going to show there. Not thinking it through, my bad. But you can see the test run were 11 instead of 9 this go time because in fact we added 2 more tests by being able to use the parameterized test. All right, so that concludes the. So here are the resources I used to pull this talk together. Again, I don't claim to be an expert, and I always try to do my best to give credit where credit is due. In keeping with that theme, I want to give a special thanks to my teammates on the Tax Commons at the Home Depot. They were instrumental. A special shout out to Jeff Anderson, who gave a lot of feedback on this talk, helped make this talk better, as well as Jonathan Davis, who helped me with OBS and getting this all pulled together. Lastly, and not least, I wanted to give a shout out to Dinner Adversary. He was my mentor when I first started into Java. Told me about the conference I did my first presentation at just this year at DevNexus. Without him, I would definitely not be doing this today. So a huge thank you to him. All right, I've reached the end. Give me a second here and I will actually pull together my Twitter handle as well as where you can find the code behind all this awesome work so that way you can take a look. Let's see. All right, let me pull up Visual Studio Code and I'm going to put it on try to put it on a blank area. All right, so Twitter. If you'd like to find me, I am ehawk61 on provided I can type, ehawk61 on Twitter. As far as the GitHub repo, if you go to github.com, and you look up ehawk61, you'll find me. And actually, I'm going to see if I can follow the link real quick because that's going to be faster than me trying to remember it. When you get to the page, see my face here, all right? And what you're looking for in the repos is migrating JUnit 4 to 5, right? And I will actually pull that together, go back here into Visual Studio Code, and give the full link. Well, provided I actually copy and paste. Try that again. All right, so github.com/ehawk61 migrating-JUnit4-JUnit5. So you can find the code for all this. I'm in the process of pulling together slides to put up with the code that are exact duplicates of what I presented today. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, concerns. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak today. Be safe out there, and looking forward to when we're all able to be back together and in person.